Have we planted the seeds of World War III? I'm going to show you how a single shift in the language of Vladimir Putin matters a lot. We're going to talk about the exact word that he said that's going to change everything. Now you might ask yourself, Peter, what are you talking about? This is a channel about investing well, about investing brilliantly. So then why are you talking about military conflicts? Why do they matter? They matter because that's part of investing brilliantly. You need to watch all the macro trends because they affect almost everything. For example, is North Korea getting more involved than they were already? And is this the creation of a new axis of evil which is now showing itself? You need to keep your eyes on the important shifts in the world if you want to keep landing on your feet in what is an absolutely chaotic and unfair and asinine financial setup that you're being led into right now by the powers that be. Nothing we say in this video is intended as personalized trading advice for you. This war in Ukraine is actually more of a war between NATO and Russia. I know that the war started as tanks drove into Ukraine. I know that, but I'm saying the war is being perpetuated in an attempt to try and beat Russia economically, militarily. It's in a lot of powerful groups' interests for this war to take a longer time and put more pressure on Russia. There's a chance NATO could defeat Russia without actually having to fight directly with Russia. There are certain interest groups that have the best interest for them being this war taking a long time and being extremely exhaustive. Ukraine is like a proxy nation where they're fighting on Ukrainian soil so you don't have to do it in your own homeland. It was no different in Korea or when we went to war over Vietnam. It's the same setup. And the reason it matters, besides all the obvious reasons that war matters and affects you and everyone, it also has effects on the investment world as well. A less important aspect of war, but we're talking about investing, so that's what we're talking about. Of course, as the obvious ones, there's going to be effects, price premiums, war premiums on things like oil, on things like gold, but almost all commodities will be affected by war. It puts the supply chains into chaos. You may be getting most of one type of a commodity from another country that then you're at war with or your relations thaw. Due to any war or military conflict expanding, there's specific types of investments you want to avoid, such as speculative things. But there's other ones that you want to gravitate towards, some of which actually do better during and because of war. If you want to go a step further, it could be argued that those big companies are a part of the problem in the first place, causing and setting up wars. As war and conflict expands, often pharmaceutical companies do well. Defense contractors like Raytheon, Boeing, and Lockheed Martin. Ticker symbols RTX, BA, or LMT. Commodity and energy stocks, specifically oil companies. Defense technology stocks. Cash does well. You can get into the DXY, that's the dollar index. None of this is personalized trading advice. Some to avoid would be bigger companies that are going to be negatively affected by the war. And that, of course, depends on the nature of the war itself, where it is, who it's between, and what kinds of technologies are they using against each other. For example, if the war breaks out mostly as a cyber war, companies that make antivirus software and IP protection software will do much better. If the war goes very badly, there's going to be less of a demand for luxury items. People are just going to be more worried about keeping warm in the winter. But if a war broke out between Pakistan and India, you don't want to be holding any Indian ETFs or any stocks there. And also the overall umbrella, you have to be cautious that war, depending how it goes, could result in massive negative ramifications for the overall stock markets. In which case, no matter what you're invested in, could take a hit in certain situations. But it's been a long-standing thing that North Korea denies helping out Russia, especially with the war in Ukraine. But the truth always eventually comes out. And it's believed that they're selling from North Korea. They're making and selling uniforms to the Russians, and they're making and selling weaponry to the Russians that's going to find its way into the conflict zone. And so South Korea says, well, to counteract that, we're going to send some weapons to Ukraine as well. But they can't do that because they only support non-lethal aid. But they're getting around it because they're providing weaponry, ammunition to America, and then we'll pass it on to Ukraine. And technically, since it's from a different department in South Korea, it's not considered that it's lethal aid. And they do whatever they want. They just change a couple of rules so they can say, well, technically, we're not doing what we told you we wouldn't do because this is a different department. So with North Korea getting, I won't say more involved. I think it's more that they're finally being exposed. We've been accusing them for a while, and now we're showing more and more proof. And it's becoming more clear at this point, which actually could lead to a risk because they're not going to be worried so much about keeping things on the lowdown. And now they might just say, okay, well, we're doing it. And they'll just be able to ship everything to Russia to get to the front lines in Ukraine. But you see how that brings South Korea into the war. And then Japan will have to be watching very closely. And with Iran selling drones to Russia, that expands the footprint of which countries are going to be involved. It's almost as though we're seeing the emergence of a new axis of evil going forward. But even if the best things happen, everything works out okay, there isn't a big expansion of the war, things calm down, there's no nuclear war, there's still massive effects the whole way on different types of industry groups. More war can lead to people who invest in military types of things. I personally try to avoid it. Some people have an issue with it, some don't. To each his own. But those types of companies always do well during times of war. And they also have a lot easier of a time getting funding from the government and from politicians and the support of the people. You know, Iran's been selling drones to Russia. So they're involved now, which brings us Syria and Israel. But let's talk about the one word that's made its way into Vladimir Putin's vocabulary. It was 10 months ago when Russia invaded Ukraine. And at that time, Vladimir Putin was always referring to that as a special military operation. But the word he said was war. It's actually illegal to talk about it as a war in Russia. It's punishable by years in prison. But this is a quote, and I'm reading this from a CNN article, but it's a quote from Vladimir Putin. Our goal is not to spin the flywheel of military conflict, but, on the contrary, to end this war. And there you have it. And when I first heard that he said that, I instantly took notice. It was meaningful. It means something. It was not an accident. Since March, it's been illegal in Russia to describe the Ukraine conflict as a war. Putin signed a censorship law that makes it a crime to disseminate fake information about the invasion, with a penalty of up to 15 years in prison. And the point of all of this is that with a purposeful adjustment of his language, very subtly, he's telegraphing a different stance to the world. Either he's taking it more seriously as a war, which has all sorts of different implications than if they were not treating it as a war. The types of weapons they use, how far they will go. But most likely, he's looking to find a way out of this quagmire, this mess that he created. And so he'll act tough leading into peace talks. But I'll show you also in this article how he's at the same time trying to signal that he's open to negotiations. Nikita Yeferev said on Twitter, "There's no decree to end the special military operation. No war was declared." When the invasion started on February 24th, Putin used the term special military operation. And he has called it that consistently and only that since that point until now. But he's signaling something. What is he signaling? He's pretty PO because Zelensky was in Washington. And during that visit is when they revealed the $1.8 billion package of assistance for Ukraine, which includes the Patriot missile defense systems. And Putin said something interesting to that, though. He says that the Patriot systems are old and Russia will always find the antidote. What he means by that is a workaround. And the general rule in military is about 10 to 1. For every $10 you spend trying to develop some advanced weapon system, it typically will only take $1 invested to figure out a way around it. And I'm just wrapping up here. This is important. Asked Thursday by a reporter whether there was a real chance of diplomacy in Ukraine, Putin said that negotiation always preceded the end of conflict. All conflicts, armed conflicts too, end one way or another with some kind of negotiations. And Putin said this as he's accusing Zelensky of refusing to negotiate. That's very clever and crafty way to signal your intention and willingness to negotiate an end to the war. When you're ready to negotiate, you accuse the other party of not being willing to negotiate. This is not a new thing, everybody. So if and as war breaks out or gets more intense, it expands. As that happens, things like gold miners will do well if there's the risk premium and the price premium on gold. Oil supplies will be under question, and therefore the price of oil often shoots up a lot when there's military uncertainty, I'll call it. And I told you that we only have about 40 some odd years of oil left before we'd run out of oil completely worldwide. And I'd like to think that we'll find new technologies between now and then. And failing that, it's going to be a lot more war as we squabble over the last remaining reserves of crude oil. Not once we run out, but as we approach that point. And I'm telling you, this is the point now. Military moves are being made now because of depleting oil supplies. That should change how you invest. You should at very least keep an eye on all of this, all these macro trends. Because what you should do right now is very different depending which way this war goes. It could expand a little. It could expand a lot. It could not expand at all. Every situation, every scenario, the best investments for you at that time will be very different than another scenario. So if you want to learn how to invest brilliantly, please join this channel. We're getting into a lot of great stuff coming up. We're talking about real estate. We're talking about the soft landing versus recession versus depression. We got videos about all sorts of relevant news items that are going to make you a brilliant investor. This is the time to pay attention to it now. So make sure to subscribe to the channel. Everything is happening now. This next year coming up is going to be so pivotal in so many ways. Please stay connected with us as we walk you through it as best we can.